As I'm preparing this episode, my girls have 2 weeks left in the school year. When I was a kid, summer break meant that we could stay up late every night, just like we would on the weekends during the school year. So, is that the way that we should go with our kids during the summer? Well, like many things parenting related, it kind of depends. And that's what I'm going to talk about on today's episode. Hi, I'm Allison Edgety, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of two. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. Summer has arrived here in the US, and the days are certainly longer, which means it's light much later in the evening. It's about this time each year that I always start getting questions about later bedtimes because our kids don't need to wake up to go to school and/or because it's now light outside at our child's typical bedtime. Last week, I did a poll on Instagram, and about 25% of the parents said that they plan to let their kids stay up later during the summer months. What was a bit more noteworthy about this poll was that of that same group that said they will let their children stay up later, only about 15 to 25% of those children who are going to stay up later will actually sleep in later in the morning. And there lies the potential sticking point. I think it's important to understand that it's always going to be best and healthiest to maintain a consistent bedtime and wake time for our children. This is actually true for all of us. For example, during the summer, my goal of trying to go to bed between 9:30 and 10 p.m. on the vast majority of nights is not going to change. But I can also appreciate that when you have an early elementary age child who's been going to bed at 7 because they needed to get up at 6 a.m. to catch the bus to school, and then now you're having a more relaxed schedule, you may want them to go to bed a little bit later during the summer when they aren't having to get up at 6 a.m. So here are some of the things to keep in mind when you're thinking about summer sleep schedules. If you do have a more relaxed summer schedule and your child or children are not what I like to call sensitive sleepers, you may be able to get away with bedtime that's, say, 30 to 60 minutes later than normal. Although I have to admit that it's kind of giving me heart palpitations to say it'd be okay to put your child to bed 60 minutes later than normal. The big indicator that this would be an okay option for your child would be that they would sleep in 30 to 60 minutes later than usual. You want them to get the same amount of night sleep on this altered schedule, that same amount that they would have gotten during their typical school year schedule. So if their typical bedtime is 7 p.m. and their typical wake time would be 6:30 a.m. during the school year, and then you want to shift that bedtime, let's say all the way to 8 p.m. during the summer, you would want your child to then sleep until 7:30 a.m. So we shifted the bedtime an hour later, you'd want the wake time to shift an hour later. So even if that is working for your child, it doesn't mean it's a perfect slam dunk, although good chance that it's going to work fine. But during that time, you also want to keep an eye on their demeanor as it relates to having that later bedtime and later wake time, because sometimes sleeping out of alignment with an ideal sleep rhythm results in sleep that is less restorative. So if you notice a slip in your child's behavior or their demeanor, you may want to shift back part way or all the way back to that typical bedtime. Now, let's talk about the kids who probably need to maintain their regular bedtime throughout the majority of the summer. Children who fall into my sensitive sleeper bucket are likely not going to do well with a later summer sleep schedule. So how do you know if this is your child? If a later bedtime does not result in a later wake time in the morning, then your child is more sensitive to their rhythm. In fact, for the ultra-sensitive children, that later bedtime may actually result in an even earlier morning wake time. So the risk there is that the later bedtime is going to result in your child getting less overall hours of sleep at night, and then they're going to start to build sleep debt. This could result in them being overtired, grumpy, and getting even lower quality sleep. So, these more sensitive sleepers are definitely going to have a smoother summer if you maintain their typical sleep schedule the vast majority of the time. And if your child will still be going to daycare or they'll be attending full day summer camps throughout the summer, they are definitely going to be their best little selves if you maintain their typical schedule that would allow them to get that full night of sleep that we target in the winter throughout the summer, because they're still going to have to get up early in the morning. So, having the knowledge of being able to understand where your child falls on this kind of sensitivity scale is power when you're considering a shifted summer sleep schedule. My oldest daughter, Addison, is my more sensitive sleeper. I've talked about her a lot on here. We're actually going to have her on pretty soon. And she was extremely sensitive to her sleep schedule until she was about 7 years old. My youngest daughter, Ainsley, has always been my more flexible sleeper, even as an infant. So for years, we just maintained their typical sleep schedule year-round because you generally want to cater to your more sensitive sleeper. And of course, Ainsley benefited from that, even if it was really needed for Addison. But for the last 2 summers, Addison, who's now 9 years old, started to be able to handle a later bedtime here and there. And so we were a bit more flexible, but with intention. So they may stay up later once a week for their evening swim meets, which they have weekly during the summer. And then if there's a fun event or an occasional night out where we just want to stay up later, we've been able to do that without disruption for these past 2 summers. But 90% of the time, they still went to bed at their typical bedtime that they have during the school year. And that's exactly what we'll plan to do this summer as well, because I know at the end of the day, keeping a consistent sleep schedule allows them to bring the best version of themselves to each day. Which, if I'm being honest, when they can bring the best version of themselves, then it's easier for me to bring the best version of myself as a parent. So that's how I like to think about summer sleep schedules, and I would encourage you to do the same. You kind of have to know your child and what's going to work for them. And as I've pointed out, not all kids in the family are the same. So you may have one child that's more flexible and one that's more sensitive, and you may find that it's worth your while to cater a little bit to your more sensitive child just to keep things smooth in the house. And before I wrap up, I definitely want to touch on a very common summer sleep struggle. When you have a child who points out that it is still light out at bedtime. First of all, whether you have an infant or a walking, talking little person, I recommend that you put blackout shades in your child's room to help them fall asleep and to help them not rise with the sun. I'm going to link to paper shades that I install in my girls' rooms during the summer. So if you need a quick fix, this would be a good option. I'll link to it in the show notes. And for the kids that do point out how light it is, you just got to stick to the truth. So you can simply say, yes, it is still light out at your bedtime because it's summertime now. We get more sunlight in the summer, which means that the sun sets later and it actually rises earlier as well. Isn't that so cool? But this doesn't change how much sleep our bodies need. In fact, it may still be light out when I go to bed. So we still need to go to bed on time, and we're going to use these shades that'll help keep your room dark, and that will help you sleep. And if you're lucky like I am, and you have one of those children that's going to say, but why? Then you can dive in a bit deeper, and you can say, as the earth circles the sun during the year, half of the earth gets more or less sunlight than the other half of the earth. In the summer months, the northern half of the earth where we live tilts towards the sun. This means that we get more sunlight, which makes our days longer. And then if you have a child who really wants to geek out, I'm sure that you can find a YouTube video that shows the sun hitting the earth during the summer versus the winter months, and they can really understand what that looks like. But what's also important here is that you stress this doesn't change how much sleep they need. All right. Those are my thoughts on summer sleep schedules. You can take what serves you and leave the rest. Next week, I'm going to be diving into summer travel sleep tips. So jump on back here and we'll talk about traveling and how to have flexibility while maintaining a sleep schedule. Thanks as always for joining me. I hope to see you back here next week. Bye for now.